right. With me today is Ed Gee. Ed is a space entrepreneur who builds AI space computers that are radiation hardened and recently launched his first satellite to space in August. I met Ed back in 2020 when we were both students early in the startup journey and competing against each other at a pitch competition for some money. At the time, Ed was working on his first startup, Stratodyne, which was launching high-altitude balloons to collect aerial imagery for farmers to be more efficient, but then pivoted into launching surveillance balloons in conflict zones for government agencies before eventually selling the company. It has been crazy following Ed's journey these last 4 years since we met, and it's an absolute pleasure having you on as one of the first guests of the new podcast. One of the most unique things about Ed's journey is that, Ed, you went straight from university to building advanced hard tech and launching satellites with none of that traditionally thought to be required work experience. How did you manage to do it?
You wake up and you start doing shit. I'm not kidding, right? There's a quote out there that says you can just do things, and really, you really can. And if you go into this when work experience is great, right? You sort of, the way I see it is this. When you go into like space tech, when you go into these deep tech industries from like SpaceX, or you go into them from these like labs or academia, you kind of get this, I don't know how to describe, like a tutorial, right? A tutorial that lets you figure out how things are done in the industry, figure out the way things should be done in a relatively low stakes, low risk environment. It's not saying you have to go through that tutorial. You can just skip it and like jump straight to the end game. But it is really like it's really recommended that you go through that tutorial. I was a bit too stupid to go through that tutorial. I decided to start doing things and I just jumped straight to the end. And that meant like essentially like when people tend to be founders, they tend to go after the low hanging fruit for the first couple of starts, right? People tend to go after B2B SaaS, event planning, consumer social, like something that resonates with them, something with customers that they understand, something that they like already have experience with. I decided I want to send shit into space, and that's what I did. And to be honest, that meant I had to deal with way more pains in the ass than I would have had I gone the software route. And that also meant, had it not been for a few lucky breaks along the way, I would have been fucked. I'm not kidding, right? Because it really is when you go into like these really high stakes, highly technical industries where you are an outsider and everyone knows each other, and it's very capital intense, so you can't really bootstrap your way in or even bootstrap an MVP. And it's like kind of, you're competing against like a ton of 30-year-old engineers or 40-year-old engineers who've been VPs of engineering like SpaceX, who have like staff engineer experience from like NASA. Then it becomes like, it really is super, super difficult to like break into that field. And honest to God, it's not something I would recommend. And there was like, when I look back on it, I'm like, oh, well, shit, there is so much shit that could have gone wrong. And I am amazed at this point that I've even managed to get this far.
Why wouldn't you recommend it?
Well, first of all, it's capital intense, very capital. Like you are not going to build a space company without venture financing or prior exit, right? Like that's off the table. We're talking like millions of dollars just to get you an MVP. Second of all, the sales cycles are super, super long. We're talking like months between even the customer agreeing to buy your stuff and like months before they pay you. It's not like B2B SaaS where the customer's like, all right, like we want to use your shit, and they just pay you like within a week. And that's if you have a completed MVP, and that takes millions of dollars in the first place. The other big issue that I see is that a lot of hard tech, a lot of deep tech industries tend to be in this kind of dead zone, right? Where it's too capital intensive to be venture backable, but you also can't really build there without venture backing. So it's kind of like a lose-lose situation. And that's like a big reason why like American manufacturing sort of like falling so far behind. It's a big reason why like hard tech and deep tech startups are really difficult to get financing for. It's a big reason why like everyone keeps going after the same like B2B SaaS companies or the same like Web3 or crypto companies or fintech companies and so on, because VCs understand it. They understand the ROI. They understand how the timelines, they understand the returns. But in space, well, it's kind of hard to justify that, hey, it's hard to guarantee to someone that has no experience in it, saying, hey, we're going to be a venture scalable outcome. We're going to be able to like hit that like $100 million in ARR within like the next 5 years.
Yep.
And like when you talk about it, right, like when we went out to fundraise, even with traction, like VCs are like always like, well, we love you guys, the business makes sense, but we have zero understanding of the broader market. So we pass, right? And that's a message that we got over and over and over. And like when you talk to my friends who are also building in hard tech, building in space, building in defense, that's a message that they're getting over and over and over and over too. And it's not just from the VC side. Like from what we've seen, like defense tech VCs, deep tech VCs are super capital constrained as well, right? You don't really see these big multi-stages, like up until recently, these big multi-stages didn't really lean into defense, didn't really lean into like hard tech or like deep tech. And that's also kind of because it's hard when you talk to LPs. It's also kind of, and you're like, well, raise a software fund. That's easy because LPs understand software. LPs use software. Everyone uses software, and we've seen software like eat the world and like become trillion-dollar economies. But space and deep tech and defense, well, that's much more difficult to justify raising a fund on. And when you're outside of that, like narrow mandate, it's really hard to get VC to justify to their LPs that they can like lead around, like putting millions of dollars of funding into you. And so it's hard to raise for. The second issue is that it's the feedback timelines are very long. The iteration timelines are very long. So imagine you've built software, right? Like a lot of founders build software. So you can, let's say, push an iteration of the software out today. And if something breaks or if something doesn't work, you can fix the glitch, fix a bug, and like push out a new iteration like tomorrow, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. In space, well, you push out an iteration today, something's broken. Well, it's going to be like 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions even before you can push out the next iteration. So everything has to be done right because the iteration cycles are so slow and because the resource constraints of every single cycle of iteration are so high. And this means everything has to be checked, double-checked, and triple-checked over and over and over again before you even push anything into production or you send something into orbit. The other, go ahead.
I was just going to say, build fast and break things is a little different. The stakes are a little different in your space. But what's the other thing?
Well, you can build fast and break things. That's what SpaceX did, right? SpaceX, look at the Falcon 1, the first launch vehicle. That thing flew, like a dozen times, and it was only successful twice. And on its first launch attempt, like Elon Musk was out of money. If that launch had failed, like SpaceX would have gone bankrupt, and we never would have gotten what we had today. But it succeeded, right? It succeeded at the most critical time for SpaceX. And now we have like SpaceX has a Falcon 9, has a Starship, has a Falcon Heavy, and it's sending people into space on a really regular basis. But it's the early days that are super hard. And in the early days, like even a small failure can kill an entire company.
So you recommend people not to do it, not to start there?
I'll say this. If you want to be a founder for the sake of being a founder, go into software. If you want to be, if you are debating between two fields, either like fintech or space tech, go with fintech. Only go into space tech if you are 100% confident that there is no other field, no other market that you would rather be building in. Because otherwise you will hate your life. And I would I'll be honest, right? Space in terms of like ROI of effort in in terms of like effort to financial ROI,
Mhm.
space is by far one of the worst industries to be in. Like you look at the amount of effort needed to build a satellite company like Planet or Black Sky or Maxar, and then you look at the performance on the public markets. It is bad. You look at the amount of effort needed to build like a manned space plane like Virgin Galactic, and you look at its performance on its back, right? That thing is
Mhm.
being delisted at the moment, and you like there is very few space stocks that have done well on the public markets.
Mhm.
And that is something we like. I don't really see that changing over at least over the next 5 years.
Mhm.
And honestly, like if you look at the amount of dilution that space companies take, if you ever have like go on PitchBook and look at that, and you look at the amount of capital they have to raise for like every single mission attempt or every single launch, it is absolutely enormous.
So space, as of now, is reserved for visionaries, but perhaps one day could become a more profitable endeavor. Like as like space companies build the infrastructure for the next generation of entrepreneurs. What do you think of that? Like
I
how?
think it will, right? I think any company that's building in space today is making a bet that the space industry is going to be huge, right? Because right as I'm going to be honest, the space market as it is today, I don't really think it can support a venture scalable outcome. I do believe that the space market continues on its same trajectory of growth. It can support these venture scalable outcomes, and that the space economy can eat the
Mhm.
world in the same way that the software economy did.
Mhm.
But I think that we are essentially making a bet that we aren't too early. Because if you look at the space startups that came out in like the 2010s and the 2000s, they came too early. And all of them either got acquired or died. And the ones that did survive went out like SPACed, right? And all of the SPACs just got the absolute shit kicked out of them once they hit the public markets.
Gotcha. Yeah. Okay. So they're getting their butt kicked. Why do you think VCs invest
Mm-hmm.
in space startups if they
Mm-hmm.
can't get that venture outcome?
I think VCs invest in space startups because they're betting on the space market getting big, right? Like this, we
Mhm.
ultimately are betting that, hey, like as launch prices come down, the
Mhm.
number of satellites going up into space goes up. And you see it, right? Because in last year, we launched, what was it, like 2,600 satellites. In 2014, we only
Mhm.
launched 240 satellites. And this launch rate is only going up, and launch prices are coming down, particularly with new potential competitors to Falcon 9, like New Glenn and Neutron, as well as new competitors in reusable rocket launch options from China and other like nations around the world. And I think this is a trend that's only going to increase, that more and more satellites will go up. And I also do believe that as humanity becomes more reliant on like space-based infrastructure, like for example, Starlink, it's going
Mhm.
to become far more apparent that space is going to become like a very, very big economy, and that
Mhm.
like we cannot live without the space economy today, like, right? But this is only going to become more and more apparent as the years go on.
What do you think is going to be like the next leap in space infrastructure?
Well, I mean, Starlink already is that next leap. We like look at how many people use Starlink nowadays, right?
Mhm.
Uh, of course, do you use Starlink?
I do not.
All right. Well, do you know anyone that uses Starlink?
I do.
Yeah, and they all got it in like the past year or so, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's that's my point, right? Like if you like Starlink, when it first came out, like not that many people started using it, and people started using it more and more, and people were like, "Wow, this is like way better than fucking AT&T or like some shit like that." Like I don't like AT&T. I don't like these big telecom companies that have a monopoly. So everyone's like slowly moving on to Starlink. And you
Mm.
look at like United, right? United Airlines, they're buying Starlink terminals.
Yeah.
They aren't using like T-Mobile. They aren't using AT&T or Sprint or like these other traditional telecoms. So moving on to the new player in space. And as we move forward, I think that really is going to be a trend we see. Like SpaceX and these big space companies, they're going to start vertically integrating and start like trying to go after the end customer themselves, right?
Yeah.
So in the past, you look at SpaceX, they would like make money from telecom indirectly by like launching a satellite for a telecom customer, be it like AT&T, T-Mobile, or Iridium. But now SpaceX is like, well, why not? Why not just go directly to that end customer and then sell like telecom services, internet services to that end customer? And I think this is going to be more of a trend going up in the space industry as company, because I feel like any successful company is, at the end of the day, a consumer company, right? You're selling the dream, you're selling the vision, you're selling to the consumer. And by starting terminals, SpaceX is effectively turning themselves into the consumer electronics company. And as these space companies go direct and start vertically integrating, they also, directly like become consumer company or start selling to these Earth-based customers that previously they wouldn't be able to access.
Yeah, just a few days ago, I saw that Qatar Airlines they officially got it like in their planes, and I think Elon had a call with some folks while they were like in flight, which I think is pretty incredible. Like Starlink really has been a leap, but what do you think the next leap is going to be? That we can't yet see. Like Starlink feels like the obvious current leap. Like after like payload cost reduction, perhaps was the previous link. What do you think is the next one just over the horizon that most of us laymen, most of us normal people who aren't in the industry can't yet see?
So look at two trends. One trend is the falling launch prices, and the second trend is the increasing reliance of the terrestrial economy on space-based infrastructure. And that's like more and more. Then if you look at that, then the logical conclusion is going to be the next leap is going to be an on-orbit servicing, right? Space tugs, fuel depots, orbital transfer vehicles that can move stuff between the moon and Earth and like geosynchronous orbit and low Earth orbit and so on. And we already are starting to see massive movements in that direction. For example, the Space Force has awarded recently like several large contracts to Starfish Space for like the orbital tug, as well as like end of life services and satellite maintenance. And we've also seen more movement in this space, for example, from companies like True Anomaly or Orbit Fab doing in-orbit refueling. And this makes sense, right? Because as launch prices go down, the cost of deploying in-orbit infrastructure also goes down, and the more in-orbit infrastructure goes up. But as more in-orbit infrastructure goes up, this creates the massive demand for maintaining that infrastructure, making sure it can be deorbited at the end of its lifetime, making sure it can be pushed around to its destinations or maintained or fixed if anything goes wrong. And as this orbital infrastructure expands, you kind of create a flywheel effect as it creates a demand for like satellite maintenance, tugs, fuel depots, and so on. And as these go up, then you can support more in-orbit infrastructure even more cheaply, extend their lifetimes, which leads to even more orbital infrastructure going up from like these companies, and which leads to even greater demand for satellite maintenance. And I really do think that this is going to be the next big thing in the space industry.
But that's all like hinged on increased terrestrial reliance on space infrastructure, correct?
That is correct. So ultimately, if you look at it, like we are making a bet on the bet here.
Got it. What like increases in like that like space infrastructure you see like on the terrestrial side, like over the horizon? Like Starlink is an obvious one, or like connectivity. Like what you do at Aethro is also like clearly some like additional value for us. What other kinds of like domains do you think might open where like we need on Earth things in space?
That's a good question. So I really do think remotes. So there's going to be two big markets, three actually, that really rely on space-based infrastructure. The first one is going to be remote sensing, right? So like using space data for everything from wildfire detection to mapping climate change, mapping carbon emissions, as well as ISR use cases like spy satellites spotting Chinese warships in the Taiwan Straits. The second one, of course, is telecom with like these new 5G constellations, as well as Starlink and these IoT constellations going up into space, offering like in-space connectivity between different assets on the ground, different equipment or terminals or antennas and ground stations on the ground to their orbital satellites, to transport data from two different points on Earth faster than ever before. And the third one, of course, is with GPS. So we've seen new alternative GPS solutions come out, right? For example, you have Zona Space launching like GPS satellites into low Earth orbit, with the idea that since it will be much closer to the Earth, much closer to the customer, you'll be able to get far more precise navigation, far more precise targeting, and direct pathfinding for stuff like autonomous vehicles or traveling through remote areas or offering alternative GPS solutions to the Department of Defense.
How interesting. And like what Aethro's building could like directly plug into almost all those use cases, right?
Well, anything that relies on doing data in space, we can work with, right? The big thing is, so we've taken a different. My thesis around space data is this, right? It's the most difficult thing. One of the most difficult tasks in space right now is moving data from the space layer down to the Earth layer. Ground stations are limited. Bandwidth is in short supply. The FCC and ITU are very strict on when you can access these ground stations, what your allocation is, what your data rate is, and this makes it difficult to run and manage these satellite missions that are generating massive amounts of data on board the spacecraft. So the less you have to move data from the space layer to the Earth layer, the more you can compute in space, and the less you have to stay in contact with the ground station, the better it is.
Could there be a paradigm shift in the foreseeable future that eliminates that bandwidth constraint between orbit and Earth, to where space compute is less needed?
So there are alternative solutions, and we've noted three of them. One of them is optical downlink. Second one is K-band, higher frequency downlink. And the third one is the potential proliferation of ground stations. The first one, optical downlink, there's one main problem with it, right? So optical downlink isn't really doable without clear weather, without a clear line of sight to the ground. If you have cloud cover, you're fucked. You can't really send data down from the satellite. Or if you aren't like directly on top of the ground station itself, you can't really move like a laser through the atmosphere at an angle. Rain fade, atmospheric fading will essentially jumble the data, and you get a very, very poor data rate. The second one, of course, is K-band, which experiences much of the same issues. K-band also and the higher frequency bands also suffer from rain fading, atmospheric effects, and other things that vastly reduce the effectiveness of the data rate if you're transmitting from an angle, and also require a massive amount of ground stations to be deployed in the field. So you always will have line of sight. So the satellite, because I want to describe like the cone, right? Imagine satellite communications as a cone. Right, you have a cone, and the K-band and optical band cone, the traditional satellite bands, S-band and X-band, have a very wide cone because the satellites can communicate at it from a greater angle, have established line of sight without being as close to the ground station. But the higher frequency bands, because they suffer so much from atmospheric interference, have a much more narrow cone, which limits the line of sight that you have and increases the need for much more proliferated ground stations. But this runs into a separate problem. The FCC and ITU are very strict on where you can build, where you can deploy ground stations, as well as how data is moved between Earth and space. Because when data is moved from a satellite down to the ground, that interferes with maritime traffic, that interferes with airborne traffic, that interferes with essentially things as simple as a radio on the ground, or even like Wi-Fi and stuff like that. So this means that the most popular satellite bands for communication are S-band and X-band. And put that in perspective, there is only one commercial S and X-band downlink station in all of North America.
Wow.
There is none within the continent of the United States. There's only S-band uplink within the United States. But these S-band uplink licenses were granted decades ago, and the FCC is not granting new S-band uplink licenses. From what we've seen, handling real estate for these complications for these new ground stations is by far a much more greater obstacle than any manufacturing or technical challenge. And this is something that can't really be overcome with new technology, or something that can't really be overcome in the traditional sense, because you're dealing with local government, you're dealing with logistics, you're dealing with regulations, you're dealing with these agencies who are frankly very antiquated and huge pains in the asses to deal with. Like we dealt with the ITU, right? We dealt with the ITU, or we dealt with the FCC for our first satellite. The FCC, at least, was understandable. I hate EITU. Every space company will say we hate EITU, and for very good reason. And it's just a pain in the ass, right, to deal with all these regulations. And not just that, it's if you look at these new ground stations, the main challenge for if you look at these different optical links, right, optical links and K-band, K-band transmitters and these high-frequency transmitters require far more power on the satellite. So they aren't really doable on smaller satellite buses, and oftentimes require customers to change entire configuration, change entire design of the satellite to accommodate these larger, far more powerful transmitters. Same thing with laser links. Laser links require a pointing accuracy of 0.00005 degrees. To put that in perspective, the average satellite in orbit only has a pointing accuracy of 0.1 degrees. So asking a customer to essentially change entire configuration of the satellite to accommodate either a far more powerful control system to hit that 4 orders of magnitude increase in the pointing accuracy, or to fit it with a much more powerful, much more larger transmitter, oftentimes isn't feasible, and customers don't want to do that when they can.
So this is the problem that you guys step in to solve. You guys have you guys are doing the computation in space and sending the results back down to Earth. Fundamentally, like for my grandmother to understand if she's watching this, right?
Absolutely, right. Like we do the computation in space. We can process the data in space, compress the data, and then by sending the processing and compressed data packets, it's much easier to route it to other satellites using a software-defined radio, or send it down to the ground without incurring the same bandwidth cost or the same latency cost or the same data storage cost as you would with just moving massive packets of data around in orbit.
With the Starlink constellation, could you like beam it to a Starlink satellite? I don't know if that's something that is supported or exists. Like how widespread those things are. Like could that be an alternative without getting too deep into technical, so that like our viewers can understand? Like, is that a possibility?
Theoretically, yes. So Starlink is selling their lasers as part of the plug-in phaser program. However, there is several issues with that. Starlink lasers, very big, very bulky, very expensive, still deals with the same issues of pointing accuracy. You need to have that very high, very precise and fine level of control to be able to send data to a Starlink satellite. Issue number 2 is it's a closed ecosystem. If you buy a Starlink laser, you can only communicate to other Starlink satellites. You can't communicate to Space Force satellites. You can't communicate to Kuiper satellites. You can't communicate to OneWeb satellites, right? Like all of these optical laser constellations have their own communication protocols, their own standards, their own bandwidths, and so on. And like the Space Force is pushing their own standard for in-space communication between satellites, but all of these big internet mega constellations don't really give a shit about it. They're just going with their own standards. And this fragmentation of bandwidths and communication protocols and standards makes it difficult to essentially customers to buy one laser and like communicate with other like constellations, or buy one laser or justify essentially locking their entire communication infrastructure into one company's ecosystem. And I can also note that of the plug-in phaser program, we have only known of one company that has bought Starlink lasers. And that is VAST. And VAST is building a space station that's reliant on the Dragon's life support system. So they already are in the SpaceX ecosystem. Like Planet Labs is not going to put Starlink laser onto their satellites. Maxar isn't going to put Starlink laser onto their satellites. And of the customers that we've talked to, like all of our customers, none of them have any interest in buying Starlink phasers and like communicating with the rest of the Starlink network.
Got it. Okay. So I think Aethro, you guys are the first company to put AI computing into space. Is that right?
We are not the first. There are other companies in the past that have used far less powerful chips, like the NVIDIA TX2 or Tether K1, and have deployed them successfully in orbit. For example, AI Tech's Venus computer deployed with the TX2. We also know of companies like Exospace that have flown TX2s in space before. However, we are the first, I believe, to use an NVIDIA Orin GPU, which is 20 times more powerful than preceding computer generations, as well as, I believe, the first chip to be based off the 8-nanometer process to be deployed in orbit.
And what does that mean for our layman back home? Like this power, what does it allow you to do functionally?
Got it. So it enables us to essentially run multiple computer processes on board the computer. it enables us to run multiple like AI and machine learning processes on board the computer simultaneously. So in the past, let's say you have a TX2 in orbit, it has far less processing power, and it's only able to do, let's say, orbital inference, right, using the computer vision model that it has on board. With the Orin, since far more upgraded processing and computational power, what it means is that you can create software containers to run multiple different processes at once. So you can have one software container on the satellite handling, like, let's say, an imaging satellite. You have, and as the imaging satellite collects images, you can have one software container essentially doing inference on the images that's collecting. You can be one software can have another software container simultaneously retraining its onboard computer vision model off of the new images that's collecting. So as it's collecting more images, the satellite can adapt to change situations, hone any onboard model that has, and effectively adapt to changing situations on the ground. And you have a third one that is compressing all of the processed results and then it's communicating that to another satellite, another in orbit, or let's say a partner relay constellation, potentially like Amazon Kuiper, and so on. And this ability to handle multiple computational tasks simultaneously really cuts back on the time that you need to like process and deliver data and get results from orbit, and it also really makes it possible to perform, like, make space missions truly autonomous, make them truly adaptive in a way that really hasn't ever been done before.
Okay, so with the satellite you guys launched, the Deimos satellite, I believe it was in August of this year. What's it doing up there? What's it up to? Is it watching us?
I wish I could. Yeah, probably. I mean, I wish I could say it. Yeah. So Deimos is a prototype. Deimos is a prototype satellite, right? So it has one of our computers on board, very small computer, like fits in my hand.
Oh, nice! You have a prop there ready to go. All right, and what's it doing?
Essentially, it's testing it's a very basic test. It's proving the point of Deimos was to prove to our customers that yes, we can fly hardware in space, right? That our computer works in space. You can communicate with our computer in space. You can deliver OTA software updates to the computer when it's in orbit, and not just that. You can the computer can run basic like ML inference workloads in space with like minimal effects from radiation, minimal issues from like thermal cycling, as well as that it could run on a very, very power constrained budget, on a very small satellite. Because if it can work on a very tiny CubeSat like Deimos, then it can most definitely work on larger satellite buses, be it like a larger microsat or like an ESPA class small sat or a space station and so on. So it really is just this proof of concept. We're showing customers that, hey, like, we are a legitimate space company. We can send stuff into space. Like, there's a quote out there. Have you ever heard, like, no one ever got fired for buying IBM?
Oh, yeah. For hiring Deep Blue, right? Or Big Blue.
Or hiring Deep Blue. Or like, yeah, right. And in space, there is like a similar adage that goes like, no one ever got fired for buying a flight heritage product, right? So no one ever got fired for buying a technology, buying a product that's been proven to work in space before. Deimos proves our product can work in space, our hardware and our software can work in space. And by doing so, we eliminate a lot of the barriers that customers have to buying our product or working with Aethro. Because they're like, well, the Aethro guys have proven that they can send stuff to build products, send that product to space, and have that product work. And when we buy this product, it's inherently de-risked in our mind. But if you buy, let's say, a product that hasn't been proven in space, that hasn't been flown in space before, that hasn't been flown on satellite before, you essentially are gambling your entire job on having that technology work. And that's not really something that people in the space industry want to do. You don't want to be gambling a multi-million-dollar satellite on something that has never been flown before.
Understandable. So this was like proof of confidence to get that flight heritage to to then get like assurance, like to show your potential customers, hey, we can do this thing.
Yep.
All right. What's the next satellite going to have? What's it going to do?
It's going to be a far more powerful version of Deimos. We're calling it Phobos. It's we named it after the two moons of Mars. It's actually twice as big as Deimos, and so the name matches in size as well. So the next satellite, it's going to be testing out our ability to perform far more intense AI workloads in space. as well as in-space training and the ability for it to potentially receive packets of data from Deimos and communicate these packets of data to the ground to essentially confirm our ability to perform in-space mesh networking as well as intersatellite communication using our compute modules.
How interesting. Okay. I did not realize you guys, the satellites you'd be launching would be communicating with each other.
Well, that's the stretch goal, right? The primary goal is to essentially prove out our ability to accomplish way more ambitious AI workloads in space using a much more powerful satellite, a much more powerful form factor, and a newly updated board revision that takes into account the lessons that we learned from Deimos and the lessons that we learned from shipping our computers to our first initial couple of customers.
And this next satellite, this is for a customer or also proof of concept?
Proof of concept, except for flying customer software payloads on it.
Interesting. Well, best of luck. I can't wait to hear about it. When do you think it's going to launch?
We're targeting May.
Okay.
May most likely will be pushed into June. You never know with SpaceX and transporter launches. They tend to fall a month or two behind schedule.
Are there any big hurdles or noteworthy constraints for computing in space, like energy or heat dissipation?
Yeah, they're both massive. So energy is a massive hurdle. If you're talking about the smaller microsat buses or nanosatellite buses, on these bigger buses, let's say ESPA class MOSAT, energy isn't that big of a hurdle. These big ESPA class buses also tend to have the ability to dissipate heat from, like, if a computer unit is going to be this small, right? These big satellite buses are going to have more than enough capacity to dissipate heat away from them or like power them up if they're only running like 2 or 3 of them. Energy and heat dissipation in space really becomes an issue when you're working with these small satellite form factors, or if you're talking about deploying like a ton of them on a single satellite, let's say in a data center or cluster computing configuration. For that, there are several different ways to manage it. For example, we have heat sinks on our computer. Like if you look at the copper piece, it's just a massive copper heat sink. We have thermal straps, which essentially can connect to an entire side panel of the satellite, turn that into a radiator, or connect to a radiator itself. Some satellites we see also have thermal control buses, which is pretty much like a skeleton within the satellite that like dissipates heat across the entire satellite bus and spreads it out. And we also see like more complex ways to cool computers that we haven't explored yet. For example, we saw one concept of cooling the internals of a satellite that used like just cycled water back and forth, and or like wasn't water, it was some type of fluid. It just cycled it back and forth and to cool the satellite. And yes, that works, but it's a pain in the ass to do, and it also vastly increases the number of failure points that you would have. And in terms of, I mean, it really just is, you have to understand. So it's space. Yes, it is cold in space. But the problem is when you're on the sun-facing side, it's very hot enough to boil water. And when it's very cold, yes, it is cold, but space is a vacuum. So there really isn't anything to dissipate that heat away beyond just radiation. So it's managing thermals is particularly difficult.
Why space? Why did you get into this? Like, what happened in your life that made you the most obsessed person I know about space?
Dude, I fucking love space. It's
but like,
I want to do shit that no human has done before. I'm not gonna. I want to do shit that no human has done before. I want to see shit that no human has ever seen before. And to be honest, like when you talk about space, like with the building in space, that is the industry to be in if you want to do these two things. Like I see the energy around. When I was a kid, I always imagined that had it been the 1500s or the 1400s, I would have been on one of the ships sailing to the New World, sailing to the Americas, because I've always wanted to explore new frontiers, at sea, and do things that haven't been done before, right? And like turn the universe of mysteries into something that is known, something I know that is tangible, something that I can record or like study. And space really is that final frontier where there still is so much unanswered mysteries about the physical universe in space. And really it's going to be something that we'll be exploring for the next like millions of
Yeah.
years potentially, right? Because if you look at the scope, the sheer scope of the universe, think about all of the things that could be out there, and you just really
Yeah.
really are like, well, I want to see them all. I want to see them all. I want
Mhm.
to know about all of them, and I want to study them and see these phenomena up close with my own eyes. And not just that, I'm personally of the opinion that if humanity, I'm of the opinion of two things. One is that if humanity wants to become immortal, space is the only way to go, right? I think that we are reaching an inflection point in our civilization where if we don't become a space-faring civilization within the next century, we never will.
Mm.
We just never will, because we will no longer have the resources. We will no longer have the economic might. We will no longer have the ability to focus our ambitions on
Mhm.
off-world exploration if we don't do it now. So we have to do it. There is no option. There is no cavalry coming to save us. We have to do it now. We have to do it today, and we have to push on it as much as possible. The second thing is, I'm of the opinion. I have a question. If no human is alive to study the works of Aristotle, of Plato, of Confucius, and these great philosophers. If no human is alive to enjoy these massive cultural legacies that we have accumulated and these stories that we've left behind, will any of humanity's works or any of humanity's culture ever have mattered?
That's a philosophical question. Like, even if we're immortal, still doesn't matter. Like, what does it mean to have meaning and matter? This is a quite a can of worms you opened here, Ed. Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I want us to diversify our investment, like just not just
Mhm.
have like a single planet, and that tremendously increases our odds of immortality. But at the same time, like everything in the scope of infinity must end, right?
Well, theoretically, yes. But theoretically, I also am. I don't like these odds, and I think like sometimes you
Right.
just know the odds, and you're like, "Fuck it, let's do it." Right? If you're a founder, so you sympathize with this, right? We're both founders, we empathize with it, and we're like, "Yeah, we know the odds of success, but we don't give a shit. We're just gonna keep
Right.
doing it." And I personally, I'm of the opinion that the thing that provides meaning to human life is
Mhm.
the creation of a human story, the creation of
Mhm.
a species-wide legacy
Yeah.
that you bind and unite all of humanity.
Right.
These stories, these cultural works, these great figures of history, all of them have meaning.
Mhm.
Even from the small, like even the lives of the lowest peasant from the
Mhm.
medieval era to
Right.
a random office worker today has meaning,
Right.
because that peasant probably created through like if you look at it, probably has like a butterfly effect where he has a massive like effect on geopolitical events today, right? Because all of our actions are interconnected. All of our actions have cause and effect on each other,
Right.
right? And like honestly, if and I think that so long as there's some human out there in the universe,
Mhm.
some fragment, or some
Yeah.
ember or spark of humanity elsewhere, somewhere in the universe, doesn't have to be on Earth.
Mhm.
Everything that humanity has done up to
Mhm.
that point will have had meaning, and
Right.
all of humanity lives on through them. But
Agree.
if humanity is extinguished, then nothing that we did ever has had value. Nothing we did ever nothing we did ever matters. And it is our goal to keep that spark,
Mhm.
that fragment of human consciousness and sentience and form alive as long as possible, even if it means expanding humanity off world, even if it
Yeah.
means sending humans, like spreading humanity across billions of worlds or
Yeah.
trillions of galaxies, we have to do it.
I'm with you. I want it to happen. And I absolutely hope that, the human species can survive for infinity and beyond,
Mm-hmm.
for as long as can be, just like building a company, building a lasting company. All companies eventually die.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to like prolong our species. Perhaps we can agree to disagree on this one. I don't want to be pessimistic, but like I would love for us to be on tens of thousands, millions, billions of different worlds and survive for billions or trillions of years. But this too shall pass, right? Like everything does have an ending when like the grand scope of infinity. Perhaps
I
we
mean,
can agree there.
I think the ending of humanity would look less like a traditional extinction. We're on millions of worlds. There is nothing that can really drive humanity extinct, right? There is no cosmic
Mhm.
event. There is no humanity will have been so greatly dispersed that
Mhm.
nothing can hunt us down. Nothing can exterminate us. I think what
Yeah.
will eventually happen is the humanity evolves along different paths, and like in 10 million years or billions of years, like we'll have like tons and tons of descendant species, but no like the actual but it'll be completely unrecognizable to like modern day humans. But I think maintaining that so long as a continuous line continues, and we still have like these descendant species across or descendant species or like spread across millions of worlds,
Mhm.
humanity still lives on through them, right? They're still our
Sure.
descendants in a way. They're still connected to the main line of humanity, and as long as they exist, humanity also exists, even if they aren't demonstrably human anymore.
Right. Right. That was my next question. That we're thinking in the same place there. What do you think about life outside of Earth, aside from humans today? Like, where
Oh,
do you think it exists?
without a question, without a doubt,
Mhm.
it's a mathematical certainty. I think it's probably even more likely that life exists in the solar system. Right? You look at the icy moons of Europa. You look at the oceanic moons of Jupiter and Saturn. You look at Titan. We have found organic compounds in the atmosphere and methane lakes of Titan. And we know like the oceans of Europa are warm at the like, very core of it because gravitational effects on the rocky core of Europa actually generates heat, and it's shielded from the radiation of Jupiter by miles of ice as well as miles of underwater ocean. We also know that liquid water exists elsewhere in the solar system, that we have found liquid water on, I believe, Mars, as well as other moons in the outer solar system.
Mm.
And I also do believe that these oceanic moons are actually the most likely outcome of life-bearing worlds, right? Look at how many terrestrial life-bearing planets, worlds are in the solar system today. One. But if you include the moons in it, the oceanic moons, then that count vastly increases to what, like three, four, maybe. And I think the life that, as we know it, the life on these oceanic moons is probably far more likely outside of the solar system too, because these moons and these oceanic icy worlds are going to be far more common than like a temperate terrestrial planet like Earth's.
Hmm.
And we essentially, by this I think we are a bit over indexing on trying to find the most Earth like planet
Mhm.
possible when life can exist in so many other different forms on so many other different planets. I will, however, note that I think uh, industrial spacefaring species like us is a rarity. It's an anomaly in the universe.
Hmm.
I think that it is not unlikely that we are amongst the first generation of potentially spacefaring civilizations out there.
Hmm.
And the main reason is intelligence isn't really something that evolves, that evolution evolves for, right? Evolution selects for short-term benefits focused around reproduction,
Mhm.
not long-term benefit. Like there is nothing in evolution that says intelligence is inherently a trait that supports reproduction, right? Intelligence does help us survive against predators. It helps us
Mhm.
hunt. It helps us gather food. But there is nothing about like building like an urban civilization that like really makes it. Okay, there's nothing about like having an urban civilization that makes reproduction easier. And if anything, having urban civilization like fucking dating apps like Hinge makes our reproduction even harder.
That's so funny.
I'm just saying it, right? So there was nothing like, and there's also other aspects like we have hands.
Mhm.
Our hands create tools,
Mhm.
and we can use these tools to farm. We can use these tools to build cities. We can use these tools to
Mhm.
build construction. Uh, Animals like dolphins can be as smart as humans. They don't have hands though. They can't. They will never find fire. They
Right.
will never farm. They'll never build structures underwater. And this kind of means that even if dolphins are as smart as humans, they never will have the ability to develop a truly industrial and spacefaring civilization. They'll never be able to advance down like the tech tree of
Mhm.
civilization, right? And this is also something that we are like. So if intelligence isn't really something that life naturally evolves to, and hands also isn't something that life naturally evolves to,
Mm.
then it can be seen that yeah, humanity is a fluke. We weren't really supposed to exist, and yet we do. And that really is what I think is the most beautiful aspect of it all.
What do you think about this? Like, if we don't really know what the beginning of time was, like, there could have been an infinite amount of time before like Earth's existence. Like, isn't it inevitable that there have been an infinite amount of species that are more intelligent than us that already existed, do exist, and will exist? Like, with the unknown limitations of space, like how far it goes, and the unknown of how far time went back and time goes forward.
Well, we have an idea of how long the universe has been around. We can
like based on like light traveling, but like there's like unperceivable universe, right? Like unperceivable space, like past our realm of detection, right?
That's true, but that also that really, if we go into that, we talk about quantum physics, and I'm afraid that's a field I'm not really qualified to answer in.
Sure.
I can
that we cannot observe.
I can also point out that the elements required to build industrial civilization, like uranium, plutonium, like these elements, right? They have only come into existence through the successive generations of stars being born, stars like compressing, crushing materials within the core, and stars dying. And if you look like yes, it is possible that the second or third generation of stars had the ability to produce these like life-bearing worlds, but these life-bearing worlds in the far, far early universe wouldn't have necessarily had access to these heavy elements required to build like large-scale civilization. So I think it is possible that we are like our sun is still early, right? The universe right now we haven't even gotten to 1% of the universe's lifespan, I don't think. And like 99% of the universe's lifespan is still ahead of us. So it is not unlikely that we are amongst the first, if not like the first 5 or so generations of stars that are capable of producing life with with the ability to go to other worlds, and with the ability to develop advanced technologies, and with the ability to industrialize.
Do you see time travel and space travel as integrally interconnected?
Well, they already are. The theory of relativity. I mean, if the moon at like light speed, right? Like time moves much more fast for you versus like time for someone, an external observer. So you can travel to the future, but you can't really travel into the past. And I have no idea how we would ever travel into the past. That opens up a whole can of worms,
right?
A bunch of questions, like. Yeah, you have stuff like different temporal paradoxes, and my personal theory is hypothesis always has been that if you travel to the past, you just create a new alternate universe, and that just kind of hand waves away all of the paradox theories.
We've already noticed like a difference in like the movement of time between like astronauts on the space station and Earth, like very minuscule, of course.
Very, very minuscule.
So we can move forward, right?
Yeah. And as humanity like starts going interstellar, right, and like over the next few centuries, as you start sending these lower like starships out to like Alpha Centauri, out to like Barnard Star or like Sirius, we moving at let's say 50% light speed or like 70% light speed. That's going to become very, very apparent. And like it's going to be strange, really, like seeing astronauts coming back from a mission that took like 30 years, and you're still at the same age that they were as they left. But that's just relativity.
Do you think in order to explore like the rest of the known universe that we will need to be able to exceed the speed of light, or do you think that will be a fundamental limitation and we have to like freeze ourselves or do something else?
So if you can reach 99% light speed or these massive velocities, you actually don't need to freeze yourself. Now, getting back is another issue, but if you go... But the theory of relativity, let's say you're going at 99% speed of light, right?
Sure.
One day for you is 1 year on Earth. Well, that means you can essentially hit Alpha Centauri in 4 days from your perspective. You can you can hit a star system that's 300 light years away in just 300 days, and you just move like 99.999, or like just keep accelerating, you can essentially cross the Milky Way in a month potentially, just by like. And yes, from the perspective of Earth, it took you 100,000 years to cross the Milky Way, but from your perspective, since you're moving so close to the speed of light, it only took you a month. And if you're fine with not getting, with it being a one-way trip, since I'm assuming you probably don't want to come back to Earth after like 200,000 years, you can probably like spread humanity out very, very, very far.
What about like answering my question for like the further bounds of our universe, like that are much further out? Like, what do you think about that? Like, how do you think space travel may evolve for those where you're traveling for a decade plus at the speed of 99% the speed of light? Like, you're still not able to reach everything, right? Like, what
That's
do you
correct.
think solutions may look like as we become a spacefaring civilization and this becomes like a real thing?
Well, if you're trying to, so the universe is expanding faster than the speed of light.
Right.
To be honest, if I have no idea what would compel a man to attempt to reach the part of the universe that you cannot even travel to at light speed, because at that point dude, there's like so much other stuff like so much closer. I have no idea I have no idea how that would even be possible.
Sure.
To be honest, like I have no, like unless you're doing some like fuckery of like I don't think we could do that fuckery with like wormholes or some shit. Right?
Some wormhole fuckery. Yeah.
I have no idea. I'm not a physicist. I'm not a physicist. I have no idea how that's possible.
All right. Coming a little bit more back down to Earth, pun intended. What do you think the next 50 to 100 years are going to look like, and like what we're doing in space? Like, what do you think like the next few like milestones, like our generation's moon landing equivalent, and maybe like our children's generation moon landing equivalent? What do you think those two next tremendous leaps might look like? Not in terms of technology, but perhaps in like milestones that are realizable and understandable to all laymen on Earth.
In space.
Yeah, exactly. In space, though. Yeah.
Got it. So hard to say. So when we landed on the moon, that was a very clear cut like achievement, right? Like humanity has touched down on the moon. We've walked on the surface. Everyone can see the moon, and like that was deemed as very futuristic. We were in part of the space race. We want to beat the Russian Reds. Nowadays, perhaps the first man landing on Mars. The big thing is, no one really knows when the first Mars landing will happen. NASA says they're going to do it in 2040. I've looked at NASA, like if you look at NASA's Mars architecture, though, they're saying they're going to launch like 16 SLS rockets, which everyone knows is not going to happen. NASA has pushed back the date for Mars landing, like by decade. They said they would land on Mars, and I remember Project Constellation said he'd land on Mars by like sometime in the late 2020s. Obviously, that never happened. That's not going to happen. When Project Constellation got canned, they said sometime in the 2030s. Now, obviously, not going to happen. And now it's saying sometime in the 2040s. So a Mars landing is always 20 years away. But there also is the aspect of greater geopolitical competition from nations like China, right? China's a wild card. The Chinese Space Agency, yes, they do have a bad habit of dropping rockets on top of their own villagers. However, they have a very good habit of sticking to timelines. To give them credit for that.
Yeah, well,
and usually,
I mean, like when you're building things for a communist regime, failure could mean so much more for you and your family than failure in capitalism, right? I imagine they are quite expedient and motivated.
I would also argue they are motivated by a factor of national pride. They want to show that their technology is superior to that of the West. The technology, in particular, is superior to that of the United States. And there is no better way to demonstrate that than beating the U.S. back to the moon and beating the U.S. to Mars. And to be honest, like if it was not for Elon Musk and SpaceX, I would bet all of my money that that the first man back on the moon would be speaking Chinese, and that the first man and the language spoken by the Martians would be fucking Mandarin.
Well, I guess thank God we have Elon. What do you think like the role of governments should be in the space business? Like, do you think that like government, like especially like in the US, like our government has proved its incompetence, and it's time to really hand over the reins, like, and invest like taxpayer money into more of these private companies. What's your stance on that? What do you think?
To guide, but not to be involved. So NASA, the biggest success that NASA has had in the past decade, or one in the crewed aspect, has been the commercial crew program, right? Getting SpaceX to fly the manned Dragon capsules up to the International Space Station for crew rotations, as well as performing more private missions like the Polaris program with Jared Isaacman. NASA's performance in the manned aspect otherwise has been a shit show. Look at the Space Launch System. That thing was supposed to cost, I believe, 500 million per launch back when it was first announced. Is now, I believe, somewhere in the range of 2 to 3 billion per launch. Although I think it might be in the range of 4 billion now. It cost NASA's the launch tower for the Artemis spacecraft was supposed to cost 200 million.
Yeah.
Bechtel still hasn't finished building that thing. That I don't think they've cut metal on it yet, and that thing has now ballooned to 2 billion. The Artemis heat shield has a tendency to fall apart during re-entry on the lunar trajectory. NASA still hasn't fixed that at all. They've been kicking the can down the road. The Gateway program has proven to be a boondoggle. I don't even know what the hell they're planning to do with that. They're just reusing like old ISS modules for that. And to be honest, I have no idea what the plan is with Gateway. The human landing system started off with multiple different competitors. Now we've pretty much it's just Starship that's making any progress on the human landing. Actually, I think NASA's invested less money in the lander to land on the moon and like go back to lunar orbit and like go back to Earth than they have in the fucking launch tower for the Space Launch System, which is a giant hunk of metal. That should not be the case. And there also is the other issue of like internal NASA politics have hamstrung most of their robotic and scientific missions. Do you read? Have you heard of Casey Handmer?
I have not.
So he writes a lot about like different internal NASA politics on his blog. One of the most notable aspects is so NASA to push through the James Webb Space Telescope. NASA crippled all of their other space telescope programs. And now you have space telescopes that are supposed to launch in the 2040s and 2050s. And by that point, so far away from today that they might as well just never happen.
Right. The technology will be irrelevant by then.
The technology will be irrelevant by then. NASA JPL has a vision on build, not buy culture. As a result, JPL moves very slow. JPL also has been unable to essentially offer competitive wages. Like the best of the aerospace engineers that in the past who have gone to NASA are now going to SpaceX. They're going to space startups. They're going to different private companies. They don't want to work for NASA anymore, right? Like NASA no longer is getting like the A crop of space graduates or like people new grads interested in space. They're all going to SpaceX. And this is like no agency or no organization has seen a greater fall from grace over the past decade than NASA has, because everyone has seen how badly the Space Launch System has been managed. Everyone has seen how discombobulated NASA's plan for going back to the moon is. Everyone has kind of realized the emperor has no clothes. NASA has no real plan to get to Mars. Right? China, arguably, is farther along on the Mars plan than NASA is. And everyone has kind of seen, like the Boeing Starliner program. Boeing got twice as much money as SpaceX did. Twice as much money. And they've flown, 3 missions now? And they still have been unable to demonstrate a safe return without problems on any single mission.
Oh my gosh. The recent problems were so embarrassing. Yeah. If and when you meet the next president one-on-one, what would you try to convince them of if you had an hour, like in the space domain or in general? Like how would you use your time?
Either you hand the reins of American space exploration over to private companies, and you have NASA act as more of a research organization and regulatory organization, similar in vein to the FAA or FCC, instead of having them take the lead. Unless you do that, and you have the U.S. focus on developing a privatized, self-sustaining space economy, versus like doing flat and footprint, like sinking billions of dollars into cost plus flat and footprint missions like the Space Launch System. China is going to have the moon. China's going to have the moon. China's going to have the solar system.
Yeah.
Mars. China's just going to have the solar system. And when China takes the moon, China is going to have the lead over the United States for centuries to come, because we're talking about a whole world of resources there, right? A whole world of resources, a whole launch pad that China can use, a whole foothold that China can use to expand outwards into the solar system. So either we beat China to the moon,
Yeah.
or we at least try to attain equal footing with China on the lunar surface, or China will, or the first men that the first starships will all be flown by astronauts that speak Mandarin. And like I'm being
Yeah.
honest here, right? Like
Sure.
the only shining aspect of the U.S. space economy has been the American private space industry. NASA has been more, if anything, NASA has been fucking up constantly over the past decade, and now everyone sees it. The big primes like Boeing have been fucking up constantly over the past decade. Now everyone sees it, and now everyone's kind of realized that, hey, if like we let these traditional organizations, these traditional big companies, and these traditional government agencies take the lead when it comes to space exploration, the U.S. is never going to go anywhere.
So I know you'd mentioned before that you're going to be on your deathbed and mumbling about space, and space is going to be what you do the rest of your life till you die. What would the best version of your lived life look like in terms of space contributions? Like on your deathbed, what do you want to say you did for humanity in space?
I want to say I had a part in enabling humanity not to just go interplanetary, but enabling humanity to go interstellar. So when I remember, back when I was a teenager, I read a study from the British Interplanetary Society about the two main technologies needed for humanity. I think it was with Project Daedalus, right?
Hmm.
A study about building, designing, and launching a slower than light starship to a nearby star system, Barnard Star, 6 light years away. And that study outlined two major areas of development that humanity would have to do in order to achieve that goal of sending a starship to another star system. One of them was better propulsion technology, like nuclear fusion, nuclear pulse propulsion, better research in that area. I am not a physicist. I dropped out of school. I can't help with that. But the second one is within reach. That second one was better autonomy, better data processing, better like AI capabilities on board these spacecraft that are light hours, light days, or light years away from Earth, but they can't send all the data back to Earth, and they have to adapt and make decisions for the mission on the spot, like on the fly, right? And that is the tech, like that's what that's what really motivates me to build Aethero.
Yeah.
The ability to like building AI hardware to go into space. Someone has to do it. So like you can't rely like downlink, but better downlink, even if it does exist, that's not going to solve the issue of like spacecraft being in the outer solar system or spacecraft being light years away from Earth and needing to like send it. They can, no matter how good the downlink is, these spacecraft will not have access to that downlink. And these
Yeah.
spacecraft will need their own data processing capabilities. They will need their own AI capabilities, and they will need their own ability to learn from changing mission data and adapt to changing circumstances
Yeah.
without needing someone on Earth to send a command back and forth. Because when you're talking about like moving at such speeds or moving at such distances, that is just straight up impossible.
Yeah. And even if it was possible, like that reliability will never be the same as edge compute making decisions on board, right?
Yeah, you need these spacecraft to be able to think for themselves. You need, we're talking about like sending spacecraft to like the outer solar system or spacecraft to like interstellar space or the star systems. There is no substitute for edge computing. There is no substitute to having that computational power, having that data processing on board, and having the ability for these spacecraft to think and act by themselves.
So how would you, if I like asked you like what the purpose of your life is, what would you say? Sure, it's related to space, but perhaps like there is like a more abstract version, or like what does it look like? Why do you exist?
That's a good question. I don't think anyone can really answer that.
Okay. Okay. Sure.
Personally,
You are essential.
I want to push humanity to the edge as far as possible. I want to push
Mhm.
humanity to new frontiers as far as possible, and uh, I want to see the first pictures of another star up close, not like from a telescope, like up close, like a picture of our own sun or the first picture of another planet in another solar system before I die, right? And I don't want to do it through a big telescope. I want to do it because there's a starship there that's taking pictures and has sent these pictures back. And given that these worlds tend to be light years away,
Mhm.
that means I don't have much time, which means I have to build in space today.
That sounds like a good enough reason to me. And do you think there was another way to like accomplish your purpose, like outside of like becoming a founder? Like, what made you become a founder? Like, how did you know that was like the point of higher leverage? Like, what was the calculation you did like in school? Like, how did you decide on this path for those one out there who want to do tremendous impact for humanity and in space? Like, why did you choose the founder path when there are other ways to create change and impact?
I didn't choose a founder path. I just fell into it, and now I'm stuck here. I'm gonna be honest. So when I went to school on an oral cases scholarship. So, and when virtual school hit, I hated virtual school, so I dropped out. I wanted to build stuff with my own hands, and I got the founder bug, right? And when you get the founder bug, it's hard to break out of it because you have that level of autonomy, you have the level of agency and self-determination that you will never get a big company, or much less in the military. And you get addicted to that, and you kind of realize I don't want to do anything else except be a founder. So personally, I don't know. It's not a good answer, right? I never wanted to be a founder. I just stumbled into it. Was just too stupid to back out of it. You know, it's like when the dog bites onto something, the dog just won't let go. That's kind of me, man.
Ed, you're one of the smartest people I know. It sounds like you just fell in love with the agency and leverage.
Yeah, you kind of do. And to be honest, if I could go back and do it all over again, I probably would have spent some time at SpaceX and figured out the ropes a bit more. Like, had that low stakes environment, that tutorial environment where I could figure things out, get more experience in the industry, and then I would have jumped into being a founder instead of like jumping straight into being a founder directly. And that would have saved me so much more pain and so much more suffering than this route that I took directly.
Did dropping out of university ever bite you in the ass building Aethro?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I can't get a normal job. I've burned my boats.
Oh, you burned your boats. You can't get a normal, and I'm sure you could get a normal job. But for Aethro, like, has it held you back? Has it like made it difficult to get government like conversations or contracts? Like, does it matter at all?
Not particularly. There is one aspect I have to mention. So when you're working with NASA and you're working with these big, more traditional agencies like the National Science Foundation, if you're applying for a grant, they will want to see a PI or a principal, like the main researcher on the grant, have a PhD or be in the process of having a PhD. You can just hire someone to do that. You don't have to be the PI yourself, right? And it does bite you a little bit when we're going out and raising venture funding from these more traditional funds, like on the East Coast or in Europe, but in Silicon Valley or on the West Coast, like everyone's used to seeing the founder, like some dropout kid, like building in the industry. I think being a dropout wouldn't have hurt me as much, but I do think that not really. I think what have helped more is being able to get that experience from a larger organization like SpaceX, right? Or another like space company before I jumped into being a space founder. And that honestly that would have greatly saved a lot of pain, because when you get that experience working in a big organization, you know how things are done. You know, just potentially scale your own company as it gets big. And not just that, you also have that initial network of contacts that you can call upon for new hires or fundraising, or like when you need help with something that I don't really have when you just jump straight into being a founder.
So what advice would you give young founders who are wanting to explore the space frontier, wanting to get in on the action and like help answer the call to make humanity interplanetary and interstellar? What would you tell them?
Why do you want to jump in on the action?
No. I know it's plenty of suffering, Ed. I've known you for a while. I know it's hard. Hard.
My advice would be, to be honest, come
on, Ed.
If you've spent time in the space industry before, understand, take understand this is going to be one of the most capex intensive industries that you've
Mhm.
ever worked in. This is going to be one of
Yeah.
the slowest industries you've ever worked in. And working with these big government customers like AFRL and NASA and all of
Yep.
them, they're going to make you want to kill, just rip your hair out in frustration, right? Because that's simply how they work. They've done it this way for decades, and they will not change it for you. However, I would argue that working in space is one of the most rewarding industries by
Mm.
far because, like I said, you're doing something that no human has ever really done before. Humanity really never has had an equivalent to the space industry before, other than the exploration and discovery era of the New World.
Mhm.
And when you work in space, you really are one of these few pioneers that's like
Yeah.
chartering a ship and like setting sail to like the West Indies and like trying mapping out uncharted territory that has never been done before. You're not like the founder of a GPT wrapper startup with like 20
Mhm.
other companies doing the same thing. You're doing something that is completely unique, right? That's completely unique with technology and code and like stuff. Everything you do is utterly novel, and that's something you really have to understand. And that also has pros and cons. The pros are, well, it's fascinating. It's easy to get new hires, easy to get people inspired to join you on the mission, right?
Mhm.
If there always will be a ton of people that will want to join any deep tech or space company. It's easy because they want to work with you on the mission. You can also pay them less, so to speak, right? Hey, like I'm saying, it's
Give them a
if
start,
you
right?
if you want to get someone to optimize an ad delivery algorithm, you better bribe them into doing it. But if you want to get someone to join you on the crusade to expand humanity to other worlds and do inspiring stuff that no one has ever done before, you don't necessarily have to bribe them. They intrinsically want to do it in spit. And right? Like the salaries at SpaceX will never be as high as the salaries at Meta. People still want to work at SpaceX because SpaceX inspires people, and people want to look at that rocket flying, Starship flying. I'm saying, yeah, I had a part in that. I helped build that. I helped make that thing
Mhm.
fly, and I helped make humanity
Sure.
into a multiplanetary species. And that same thing goes in for the space industry. You will have an easier time hiring, but you will not have an easier time fundraising. When fundraising, most VCs are straight up not going to understand the industry
Mhm.
that they're working in. They will not understand space, and since they get like so many like pitches every single day, they are not going to put in the time to understand space. When you find a VC that's willing to put in the time to really study space or studying the market, treasure that relationship. That VC is
Mhm.
absolutely serious about investing, and when expect like even if you have a lot of traction, expect a ton of no's that don't make
Mhm.
any sense whatsoever. And
Yeah.
most of these no's are just going to be because the VC is like, yeah, I don't want to spend time learning about an entirely alien market that has a very long return timeline, a very long capex
Yeah.
expenditures. And the other big thing is launching and running a satellite is always it's going to be way more difficult than anyone ever anticipates. Take the operational cost of any satellite mission, double that, and that's probably closer to the true budget. And that's like the cap. It's not just CapEx, OpEx is insane. Not just from the like running and scheduling, like paying a ground station provider, but also from the regulatory side, right? Because you also
Yeah.
have to deal with FCC licensing, you have to deal with ITU licensing, you have to deal with licensing every
Mhm.
individual ground station, you have to deal with like handling ground station passes, handling like yearly license renewals, and it's just a huge pain in the ass.
You guys launched your last satellite, your first satellite from your studio apartment, right?
We're operating that from a studio apartment and a basement.
Oh boy, there you go. So, they can do it. Any other advice? Any other advice you'd give somebody like who's like 20 years old, dropping out of school to start like their own space company and like is already certain they want to do it. We don't need to scare them away. Like, well, anything else you'd tell them to increase their odds of success? Perhaps something tactical?
I mean, it's hard to say. I personally don't know any much good advice to give them. I mean, if I could go back, I'd do it a bit differently, right?
Mhm.
Uh, I will say this: startups die. Startups tend to die not because they run out of money, but because they tend to run out of morale.
Right. Right.
Space is one of those industries where shit is like you will probably more space companies that probably run out. Morale is extremely important. Make sure you don't burn out.
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, beyond that, I mean, I don't really know. Like, it's really you
Yeah.
fuck around and you find out, and you find out space is a really hard industry,
Yeah.
and you just like have to just keep dealing with it, just keep getting back up. I mean, I don't know what else to say.
Yeah. The founder journey is getting punched in the face and getting back up. Although I imagine the punches are a little harder and the cost to get back up is also a little harder. How do you make the founder grind sustainable for yourself, Ed? Like, how do you keep waking up in the mornings, getting punched in the face, and then waking up with a smile again to do it all again the next day? Like, how do you refill your cup? How do you stay with it?
I don't necessarily do it because I enjoy it. I do it because I think I'm right. I think that space computers will be important. I think deploying AI hardware in space will be important. And
Mhm.
I think that I don't think there are other legitimate players in our space that really understand the implications that this has for humanity as a whole, right? Being able to do data processing, being able to make space missions autonomous for like in the far reaches of the solar system
Mhm.
or beyond. So I do it because I don't see any other choice. And when you're a founder, you don't do it because you enjoy it. You do it because that's your responsibility. And you have to understand, like, it's not you. It's discipline. It's discipline. That's the most important trait of any founder, right? You never do something because you enjoy it. You do it because you have to, because there's people counting on you, and there is no one else. The buck stops with you. There's no one else
Yeah.
to pick up the slack, and ultimately, you either have that internal discipline to like wake up and just do it, and
Mhm.
not like you can hate it, but you still have to do it, and you either have the discipline to do that or you don't. And if you don't have the discipline to do that, then quite frankly, you shouldn't be a founder, right?
Right. But how do you keep going? Like, how do you make sure, like, even you have to do like certain things outside of work, like exercise, for example, or more sustainable work habits, or,
Mm-hmm.
having a time that you like make sure to close the computer at the end of the day to, make time for yourself or your significant other. Like, are there things that you employ to make this potentially multi-decade endeavor or lifelong endeavor something you can sustain
Mm-hmm.
even with the excesses of the founder workload?
I mean, of course, you make time for yourself to work out, right? You spend time with your friends. You spend time with people who are close and important to you. And like you spend you decompress. You
Yeah.
take some time, meditate, decompress at the end of every day. But like that's just everyone has to do that, right? Like even investment banker in New York has to do that. Even a software engineer at
Right.
Apple has to do that. Anyone at a high
Right.
stress, high long hour role has to do that. There's nothing unique about doing that as a founder versus doing that
Right.
as like investment banker or a software engineer. But it's just as a founder, the stakes are much higher. And I think at some point, as a founder, some part of the mind breaks, and you just the risk of like you no longer make the risk reward calculation the same way that some normal person does, and you're just like fuck, we just keep doing it, right? And the way the joke I always like to make is the line between being a founder and being a chronic gambling addict is very thin, probably non-existent. Like as a founder, you just kind of are a chronic gambling addict, and this means you just don't process risk the same way that other people do,
Yeah.
and you're just like, you know what, like we have no path, we just keep doing it. And this you need to kind of have that broken in you
Yeah.
to be a founder. And the more risky, the more dangerous, the more high stakes the industry is, the more you kind of need that like kind of yeah, like fuck it, I'm not, I don't care about the risks here. I'm just going to go ahead and do it because I'm
Yeah.
just going to win, and I don't think about it.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Like, if you're trying to be rational and make being a founder make sense on paper,
It never does. It never
probably
does.
something else. And probably just buy a lottery ticket instead.
Yeah. And being a founder is never a rational choice. You're talking about like for a lot of people, you're talking about like leaving a comfortable life track where you could be making six figures easily, have seven-figure net worth by the time you're 30, retire early by the time you're like 40, to do something where you eat less or potentially unemployable for years, uh, are essentially dependent on the whims and wishes of external people who don't really have that stake in you the same way that like your employer would, and just like constantly just get beaten up over and over and over, and essentially have the buck stop with you because there is no
Yeah.
like if you're a software engineer at a big company and something breaks, right? You can just coming back in on Monday and fix it, and
Yeah.
everything's going to be fine. The bug doesn't stop with you. The boss has it handled. Some other team has it handled. The support team has it handled. If you're a founder and something breaks, you have to fix it right now. There is no support team. There is no manager. There is no engineer that can call on. It is up to you.
Yeah. That's the grind. That's what we all signed up for. I imagine it's a little more intensive. The thing that breaks is flying in space. I imagine the stakes are a little higher than like the typical SaaS startup.
We still have offer tools and stuff like that. I mean,
Mhm.
every company relies on software very much heavily nowadays, and for everything that gets sent into space, we're talking like
Yeah.
thousands of hours of work behind every last little article.
What's the time that made you closest to giving up? I know you'd never give up, Ed. That's why I said closest. You're unstoppable.
In space, it's going to be fundraising, right? Because you're talking about tons and tons and tons of no's from VCs that don't believe in the
Yeah.
industry, that don't believe in your vision, who don't understand the industry and don't care enough about the
Yeah.
industry, quite frankly, to learn about it. Morale always sinks to a low during fundraising because not only are you getting punched in the face, you're talking to people that you respect and having these people say, yeah, we don't believe in you, we don't believe in your vision, we don't believe in the business, we're not going to give you any money. And at the same time, they look at their own runway like dwindling down constantly, week by week, month by month. They're like, ah, shit, well, maybe this isn't going to work out. Maybe it's time to look at something else or pivot or something. So fundraising, honestly, is a game of chicken, right? You're like looking at VCs and VCs are looking at you, and the first person to blink just gets fucked. That's where I see it. The other time, I mean, to be honest, like, yeah, like everything is solvable given enough runway
Mhm.
and enough like talent. Everything is solvable. But fundraising is one existential thing for every deep tech company that can't really get away from. And it's one thing that will make every deep tech founder like absolutely hate their lives because you're talking to people that don't understand you, don't understand the industry, don't understand the passion for it, and don't really care in particular about what you're building outside of the whatever external markers or prestige stat symbols that the team might have. And this is something that I mean, we talk to any deep tech founder and ask them, what's your least favorite part of the job? Everyone's going to say fundraising. And to be honest, if you enjoy fundraising, I'm a contrarian. I think if fundraising is the hardest, I think if fundraising is the easiest part of showing the business, you are probably just going to waste up all your money and just die. Like we've seen so many stories of like overfunded startups during the ZERP era that just raised a ton of money, never had any
Mhm.
customers, and died, right? And I think like the attitude of hey, fundraising should be the easiest part of doing a startup. That's false. That should not be the easiest part. The easiest part should be selling to customers because you understand what the customers want.
Hmm.
The easiest part should be getting the customers to agree to use your product. If that is not the easiest part of what you're doing, you either are not building something that customers properly want, or not building to the needs of the industry, or you are just wasting everyone's money and time.
That's a very interesting take, Ed. I haven't thought about it that way. I haven't really given it too much thought on like rank ordering the hardest versus easiest. Like I'm a little too busy getting punched in the face on the regular. But maybe one day I'll stack rank them and think which punches hurt least than most. Yeah, but that's an interesting take. Ed, when it comes to the kind of impact you want to have in your lifetime, you must be trying to build a lasting company.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go about building a lasting company as like a missionary that's different, fundamentally different than a mercenary trying to solve the same problem? Then again, maybe a mercenary would never enter such a difficult space, but how are you building a lasting company? How are you doing that?
That's a bit of an early question to ask, considering that we are only less than 2 years into the journey
Yeah.
of Aethero.
Building the foundation, though, aren't you? Or we can come back to that question on another time when we have you back.
Give me a year, and I'll give you a better
Okay.
answer. For
Sure.
now, I don't like to build. You never know if a company's lasting. In my
Mhm.
opinion, one can never call a company lasting or like race get
Yeah.
started on making a company lasting until they raise the first growth round, right? Maybe a
Mhm.
Series A, Series B, or so on. The
Mhm.
reason being, like, if you're that early and you had someone found like full product market fit, and still are like still in the filling out stages of the market, like figuring out like revenue, figuring out go to
Yeah.
market pipeline, and all that solidified, it's hard to really determine that, hey, we want to make this company lasting. Like
Sure.
everyone says, hey, I want to build a lasting company. And sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. Look at Salesforce. Like when Mark Benioff decided to build Salesforce, it's like what, a CRM for sales businesses, right? Like
Mhm.
lead gathering, organizing that. He probably imagined it to be a gimmick. He probably didn't imagine Salesforce to be a lasting generational company, the titan of industry that it is today.
Hmm.
Look at space. Uh, when Look at all the space companies that were trying to build like launch vehicles or satellite buses and stuff like that. They probably thought that, hey, we want this is hard. This is hard tech. This is deep research that we're doing here. We're going to make this a generational lasting company. And look at how many of them are still left today. They are still left operation today. And you'll see like most of them don't exist anymore. So building a lasting company, I don't really think matters what industry you're in. I really
Mhm.
do think this happens to be right time, right place, lots of luck, and not fucking up the early stages when you get into Series A, Series B, as well as not running out morale. Morale is the biggest, most important thing. The biggest thing we've seen, I personally see from companies that get acquired early, or like don't really like become like a lasting kind of industry, is it's so easy to give up. When you get offered, let's say $100 million or $200 million, personal to you as a founder, as well as like $1 billion exit, it's kind of hard to say, yeah, I'm going to keep getting punched in the face all the time. I'm not going to take this 100 mil, 200 mil, this generational wealth that can change the lives of you, everyone, not just you, but everyone around you and your family. And not just that, like when your family knows about it, they're going to be pressuring you to take that 100 mil because they're going to be like, yeah, like you already have taken such a huge risk. Why keep pushing your luck, right? And a lot of founders just kind of succumb to that because when you start a company when you're in the 20s, by the time you get the offer, you're probably in your 30s. You probably have a wife, you probably have kids, you probably have a family, you probably have mouths to feed. And you're like, yeah, I'd rather just take this 100 mil. I'd rather be with my family and I'd rather focus on it. And right now, like it's easy to say that, hey, I want to make my company lasting because there is no other mouths depending on you. There is no one else depending on you in the same way that people will be depending on you when your company is a Series E company, when it comes about IPO, when you're getting offered like hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity or billions of dollars in liquidity. A lot of founders at that time they blink and they say, "Yeah, I want to go back. I want to focus on my family. I want to focus on my new ventures. I've gotten burnt out. I've gotten sick of this company." So it's hard to say. But the ones that are truly lasting, the ones that are truly iconic, tend to be the ones that retain their founder CEOs who look at that $1 billion payday or that hundred like 9-figure payday and are like, yeah, I don't care about that. I care more about the company. I care more about pushing this forward. And one can say all they want about like, hey, I want to make this company lasting, but one can never truly answer that question until they are put into that position. That's my take on it.
Yeah. Yeah. And until you have the term sheet on the table, until
Until you
you
have
have.
not until you have the terms on the table. It's not until like you have that offer in front of you and you're in your 30s and your kids are going to private school and your wife's nagging you about like the family vacation or upgrading the family home, and like you can't work like like you can't be working like 100 hours a week anymore.
Yeah.
And at that point, when you look at it, it's much easier to say, well, I think it's time for me to call quits, or I think it's time for me to move on to something else.
Take my chips off the table and do something
Take
else.
my chips off the table. Or by that point, you already have like external stakeholders, right? You have the board pushing on you. You lose that autonomy. You lose that agency as you bring on more and more and more
Yeah.
investors, and the company probably has morphed into something that's different from your original vision, or has grown past just yourself. And for a lot of founders, like I don't want to be a professional project manager anymore. I want to do something new. I want to start something new and get back that agency back. And it's very easy to just dip at that point.
Series B onwards, I hear that there are options to take some chips off the table while still like continuing to run with it, take a few mil off the table, especially like towards the later rounds. So there, in theory, is a way to take some cash out for yourself and like continue doubling down. Now, when it comes to the grind, like that's not going to go away. Like it's going to stay like the top priority in your life. For as long as you're running it. And so for that reason, I could see many founders. I've seen many founders leave, even when like it wasn't about money. Just when it comes to
I mean,
like,
the big thing is it's easy to say it's easy to say today, right? But it's always different when the offer's on the table,
yeah,
and you're looking at millions of dollars in the face. I mean, it's everyone will say, "I'm not going to take these secondaries. I'm going to make my company a generational company," and everyone and usually people will blink when that offer is given to them.
yeah, it's hard not to. I've seen it happen. It's understandable, but not for everybody. Could you tell us the story of Stratadyne and all the pivots that you guys went through? That like I think young founders could really get some value learning about the story of Stratadyne.
Got it. Absolutely. So Stratadyne, I started it with the idea of
How old
launching.
were you? How old were you when you started?
20. 20. It was during virtual school during COVID. I hated virtual school, didn't see a point in it, dropped out. I started to do Stratadyne. Figured I might as well tap into my passion for rocketry and space tech and try to do a startup of where we would try to launch rockets into orbit from the stratosphere, right? In the stratosphere, we're talking about much thinner atmosphere, much less air resistance. Theoretically, you can replace the first stage of a launch vehicle with it. Turns out, two problems. The main obstacle to getting into orbit is delta V, not altitude. Delta V is kind of hard to get when you're talking about limiting yourself to a small launch vehicle that has to be able to be hoisted up by a balloon. Problem number two is that the launch market is actually very small. There's a ton of startups around that time. I remember like Leo Aerospace being one that were pursuing this idea as well of launching rockets from balloons. All of them, I think, have failed at this point because SpaceX has emerged as a clear winner. And turns out cost is a big, giant issue when you're talking about like sending such small payloads into orbit on such a small form factor. So I remember taking it, and eventually we got told by our investors, "Hey, you guys should really fund." I remember taking that, and we tried to find investors, and I remember cold emailing around 1,000 or so investors to raise the first $500,000, which was that was that's a horrible experience. I don't recommend it unless you have to. But
perseverance is admirable, and like that may be what it takes to like the aspiring hard tech, space tech, deep tech founders out there listening. Like you may have to email 1,000 people to raise 500K, and like that may be what it takes.
I could do it today. I don't think I could do it today. That's all I'm saying. I don't think I could do it today.
If you had to, you would.
If I had to, I would. If I had to, I would. But I'm saying that right now. Like if I'm looking at it back on it, I'm like, I don't know why I didn't quit. I have no idea why I didn't quit.
That's what it takes. That's just what it takes. And I think that's important not to gloss over. Like for the aspiring founders listening to this, like for the founders that may have otherwise stopped after their 30th, 50th, 100th no, like it may genuinely take 300 like cold emails, cold calls, chasing down an investor, like before you get your very first yes. And like that is like the grit and spirit of determination that it just takes. I just want to make sure that we highlight that.
I mean, the thing was, I went about it in the most knuckle-headed way possible. I didn't learn anything about the venture market. I just found out there's something called a VC that will give you money to build stuff. And I figured, you know what? If I email enough of these VCs, eventually one of them is going to take pity on us and give us money. And that's what I did. Right? Like if you're from Stanford, if you're from like a school with a strong CS program or from the coast, you probably will have a much better understanding how VCs operate. You probably will have connections to VCs. You probably will have a network of warm introductions. Use that. Don't do the code. Don't do 1,000 cold emails. That, in retrospect, wasted a ton of my time. Particularly as all of the cold emails, to get a response on cold emails, you have to make them personalized. So we're talking like hours of research, just doing nothing but sending cold emails every single day. Could have spent that time building. Don't do that. There's a lot of resources out nowadays, like for example, like 15, 17's different like grants as well as the
Yeah.
summer building program. You have like different, you have like dorm room fund, rough draft ventures, all of these different funds that invest in the student founders. Go through them first, build a network first. Don't just charge straight into it. Take some time to understand the market. Take some time to understand the ecosystem. Take some time to understand what makes VCs tick, what makes them say yes, as well as the same for the customers. What makes your customers tick? What makes them say yes? What's your main pain point? And what is something you can promise them that you know that they absolutely will say yes to in a short period of time?
But it is okay to feel like a knucklehead, at the very start. Like it's a part of it is like knowing that you'll make it happen either way, right?
Well, the analogy I can give is most people, let's say you're trying to get into a building, most people, and you can't find a door. Most people will walk around the building and find the entrance and then walk into that way.
Mm-hmm.
I decided to ram my head against a brick wall until the brick wall broke and then walked in.
Yeah, that sounds like you, Ed. That's persistent and stubborn, and just if you could just focus that in the areas that have the most leverage, that's ideal. But like that hard headedness, like it's still required. Just ideally, like oriented in the most useful high leverage pursuits, right?
Yeah.
So how did the Stratodyne like go? What were the pivots? Like how did you find the problem to solve? Like, and maybe share like the rules that you broke, like, breaking rules and asking for forgiveness, with the first balloons with cameras on them. Like, could you share that story? I love hearing this story, and I know that our listeners would love to hear it as well.
Oh man, that was such a long time ago. It's hard to remember.
Come on, Ed. You're not that old.
It feels like a long time. It was like what 3 years ago, but 4 years ago around now at this point. But it's so much has happened since then that's kind of hard to recall.
Yeah.
So with Stratodyne, wow, I remember we were selling. So when we pivoted away from doing the launch option from these balloons, we pivoted into using our balloons as mobile surveillance platforms, security platforms, as well as like doing real-time weather data collection. I remember going out to customers, pretending to be a big company in stealth mode, right? And we were like saying, "Oh, right, do you want to place an order from us?" And I remember we didn't actually know how much a balloon would cost. I was just like kind of like estimating it. Turns out we were actually selling shit at a loss. Probably a bad idea. But don't do this. Don't do this. Don't pretend to be a big company and like sell a product that doesn't exist. But we were getting a ton of non-binding LOIs done with these big allied militaries and these big like organizations. And in retrospect, that was what enabled that really did help us a lot with fundraising towards the end of Stratodyne, and that also did help us get off the ground. Though these contracts and these LOIs would have come back to haunt us because the margins on them were non-existent, and they essentially would have required us to raise a large round of venture funding, even to just be able to fulfill just the first phase of them. So don't do that.
Yeah.
Probably don't do that.
Good takeaway. I'll noted. But what about the like helping farmers, man? Like you were doing that for a while. Like don't skip over that. That's like
oh yeah. I mean, we started off doing some to agriculture, but agriculture turns out you have to find it's not just about fixing a problem for the customer. It's about finding the right customer too. You have to find a customer that's open to adopting new technology, that has deep pockets, that can make decisions relatively fast, and is relatively easy to build and integrate for. They can buy a standardized product that they're offering and without needing a great deal of customization or integration work. For agriculture was not this type of customer. Agriculture deals with low margins, so they have low budgets. They don't really understand how new technology works, and so essentially doing like imaging for farmers would require a great deal of customization, a great deal of integration work, as well as a great deal of manual labor from our end, right? So we ended up pivoting into like working with defense customers because yes, the sales cycles there are difficult, but they at least understand new technology. They understand what they want. They understand how things are. right? With working with startups. Like farmers will understand what a startup is. Farmers don't like to work with startups. Farmers know about Bayer and Monsanto and John Deere. Farmers don't know about some bumfuck startups like bumbling around the Midwest. And so they don't trust you. Defense, they will, right? Defense is usually working with startups. They're usually working like a bit of a janky solution,
Yeah.
and particularly in the SBIR phase.
Mhm.
And that's why we pivoted into working with these big defense customers. And they do have much deeper pockets. So it's not just about solving the right problem, it's solving the right problem for the right people. So some
Mm.
customer segments just aren't worth it. And that's something that I see a lot of mistake I see a lot of founders making, right? When they jump into an industry, like particularly like in ed tech, is one commonly mentioned example. Ed tech, very low margins, very low budgets, very strict purchasing guide timelines, very long timelines, very tons of integration work, tons of custom work needed per customer. So oftentimes founders jump into it and they're like, well, we have something the customer wants, but it's not the right customer. So it's better usually to find a different type of idea or pivot to something else.
Hmm. How do you know it's time to pivot? Like if there's a startup founder watching this that has been like banging their head against the wall for the longest, like how do they know? Because so much of the startup journey is getting punched in the face. How do you know if you should pivot or continue getting punched in the face with the current thing you're trying?
That's up to the founder's intuition. But ultimately, if you're getting punched in the face, you have to look at the way you're getting punched in the face. You're constantly getting punched in the face the same way from customers, and it's not related to some. It's not something you can fix, right? It's related to the customer itself, right? Maybe customers keep telling you the budgets are too low, or maybe customers keep saying that we'd love to buy this, but in 12 months. Or you're starting to find that the number of customers you expected would want the solution isn't as great as you like originally estimated, then
Mhm.
might probably be time to pivot and find a new industry or a new customer set. It can be, yeah,
Ed, who do you think are the main competitors in the space race today?
China and America, and potentially India. But the ESA, the European Space Agency, has encountered a lot of issues on the regulatory side, right? ESA has a very burgeoning ecosystem, a small startup. I would argue it's easier to work with the European Space Agency if you then it, as a European company, it's probably easier to work with the European Space Agency than it
Mhm.
is in America as an American company trying to work with NASA. However, the European Space Agency is burdened by one, a massive need for continuous committee support on every major project because you
Mhm.
need the individual national space agencies, individual legislatures, and individual committees and governments of every single country involved in the project to agree on every single little change you want to make. And two, the constant jockeying of different political interests within Europe, as well as the European. I, I would argue that almost a European culture. European culture usually isn't as ambitious as American
Mhm.
culture. It's not to dig on Europe, right? I can understand why people are attracted to Europe, or like why people want to export the European model to the United States. In Europe, it is very easy to be middle class. Europe actually pushes everyone into the middle class. For the rich, it pushes them into the middle class through higher taxation, and for the poor, it pushes you into the middle class by offering you free social services, free healthcare, free university, free it's and making it very difficult for you to get fired. There, and this creates, this is very different from the American system. The American system, I would argue, high stakes, high reward. In America, if you fail, you can like actually sink down very, very low, but and have essentially no safety net down there to support you. But in America, you can also, if you're capable and you're ambitious enough and you have agency, you can ascend to the uppermost tiers of society. You can be one of the richest people in America without needing to be born there. And that's one thing that's worth noting in Europe. If you look at, for example, the richest families in Germany or Italy, actually, no, if you look at the richest families in Italy in the 1500s, and you look at the richest families in Italy today, you'll see a ton of the same names showing up over and over and over again. If, and if you look, but in America, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, they are not the richest families in America today. There's a constantly cycling in and shuffling out of the old and new guard. And this essentially means American innovation stays strong because you have to be constantly innovating, you have to be constantly taking risks, you have to constantly be moving forward in order to stay at the top. Whereas in Europe, it's very easy if you're at the top, to just kind of entrench yourself at the top and stay there and sort of kick the ladder down for anyone that's trying to break their way into the top and ascend to the top through a massive amount of regulations and taxation in the name of ensuring an egalitarian, equal society. And that's where I think Europe really falls short. That's why I think the most ambitious, talented people in Europe are all moving to the US. They don't want to stay in Europe. They want to come to the US because they want to take their shot at being top dog. In Europe, you're either born the top dog or you just don't become it. Right? You can stay middle class, you can live a comfortable life, but you're not going to be like the richest man in Europe.
And also, European culture doesn't reward ambition. Like it isn't something that is genuinely like prided. Like I know Europe has many different countries and many different cultures, but generally speaking, like America prides itself on being ambitious and pushing the envelope in a way that nowhere else does. Like really the most ambitious in the world are coming to America, and they're usually coming to America's tier 1 cities like New York where I'm at, or San Francisco where you're at. And like they're creating like a tremendous concentration that's creating all these positive feedback loops, like just having such a high density of the most ambitious people, and it calls it.
I would argue it's not just a lack of. Europe doesn't necessarily punish you for having ambition. However, it also doesn't gracefully allow you to fail. In America, I would argue the greatest factor that makes America so successful is that failure isn't necessarily. Yes, you can sink very low with failure, but if you fail and you get up again, you won't have that same level of stigma around you. In Europe, if you fail, you have that stigma, right? You have that stigma of being a failed entrepreneur. In America, like look at how many founders there are in America whose first ventures, the second ventures failed, and they were still able to raise money for the third venture, and that third venture succeeded, or that fourth venture succeeded. In Europe, you won't have that. You won't have that in Europe, right? You fail and you get one shot and you're fucked. And in Europe, it's not just that. Ambition, yes, it isn't necessarily. I think ambition, people who tend to be ambitious usually tend to have their own agency. They usually tend to break the rules. They usually tend to not like to fit within a certain expectation that society and regulations impose upon them. And in Europe, the greater amount of regulations and sort of create this situation where the most ambitious people just sort of chafe under these regulations, chafe in that environment, and just do not want to stay there. Do not want to stay in that risk-averse environment. Do not want to stay in an environment where they're constantly being regulated, constantly forced to perform actions for the sake of compliance that they don't really understand, they don't really agree with. And in that case, it makes more sense for them to come to America.
Yeah. I mean, I think your parents came here as immigrants as well, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. We're both first generation. My family from Ukraine, and I believe your family from China. Is that right?
China, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And so like, this is truly like a rich land of opportunity. And the key difference that I think, for our listeners outside of the US to understand is that America like guarantees like equality of opportunity, but not necessarily like equality of outcome the way a lot of like other Western countries perhaps do. And that is like very different. Like everybody has a chance to make it here. Right. But it's like in your own hands. Like we really reward individualism and agency, and got to go out there and just grab it. Right.
Yeah.
How do you, like you mentioned like the Italian family names who you see as still being like wealthy and powerful, the same ones from the 1500s, like the Medicis, etc. Your love, you and I have a deep appreciation for history. How would you say history helps you to be better at being a founder? Like, can you see it in your day-to-day or like a particular instance?
I would argue being a founder is very similar in the vein of being a feudal monarch in Europe.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not kidding. You look at the kings of Europe, they oftentimes they were not autocratic. They have to balance the interests of many stakeholders, be it the nobility. They have to rely on the nobility to raise armies, to raise taxes, to raise funds. They have to rely on the peasantry to work the field, to provide tax revenue. They have to rely on the clergy to bless the reigns, to provide approval, and they also have to rely on the papacy. Being the founder, it's very much in the same vein where you even if you are a CEO, yes, you are top dog in the company, but you still have stakeholders, you have employees that you have to make happy. You have VCs that have to make happy. You have to be able to garner external support. You have to be able to garner support from within. You have to be able to manage the finances of your kingdom, your company, so to speak. And ultimately, you're dealing with a lot. Yes, you are top dog. Yes, even if you are top dog, you still are not really top dog. You still answer to a massive myriad of people that you. And even if you are supposed to be independent, you aren't really that independent in the grand scheme of things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. That is an interesting comparison. That is not what I was expecting. A little bit out of left field. What's a favorite book you might recommend?
Everyone recommends this. Read Three Body Problem. Read the whole series. If you understand Chinese, read the Chinese translation. Don't read the English translation. But if you can't understand Chinese, if you can't read or write Chinese, which I'm guessing most of you listeners, but most of the listeners probably won't, do read it. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. And what about for the founder journey specifically?
I never read any books about the founder journey in particular, and I never will. I've learned everything from first. I've actually never listened to a podcast about the founder journey. You just take it. You just take it as it is, right? Because reading about something in theory is always different from executing in practice. And I prefer to look at everything with an open mind and execute and learn from first principles rather than having the idea already set up and going in with preconceptions.
That's so interesting. So do you read any books that help you with succeeding in business at all, or self-help, anything like that?
No, actually not.
That's so rare. I don't know if I've ever met a founder who has never read a book to try and help them succeed. Well, you're doing great.
You don't overthink it. You don't overthink it. You just do. Just don't think about it too much. Just do.
Sure. How do you sharpen your mind? Traditionally, most founders turn to books. It may be books just outside of the, work domain or the founder domain, but how do you keep yourself sharp outside of work? How do you grow yourself?
You select random topics that you're interested in, and you get really deep into these topics. You focus on side projects. For example, right now I'm restoring the Russian kamikaze drone, one of those FPV boomerang drones that the Russians have in Ukraine. They captured one. I bought it off eBay, and I'm restoring it inside my apartment. Right? You find those side projects.
You're restoring a kamikaze drone from the battlefield?
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's insane. What compelled you to do this?
Why not?
So are you going to use it?
It's a kamikaze drone, no, but it flies super fast. Why not?
Yeah, okay. Do you have any plans for this kamikaze drone you're restoring?
I can probably fly it around as an FPV drone. It's FPV racing. It sounds kind of fun. Might as well get into it using the old Russian model. But yeah, you just... it really just is side projects, right? Side projects, pursuing your passions, and finding multiple areas to get really deep into, and just learning as much as possible about these subjects.
This kamikaze drone, I'm going to be thinking about it for a little while. That's so interesting. That's so different. How else do you grow yourself outside of side projects? Is there anything else you do to make sure you're constantly being the best version of yourself, to keep your own growth curve ahead of that of the business so that you don't stunt your dream?
Personally, I don't understand the whole... Everyone has their own preconceptions around personal growth.
Sure.
I believe the best way to grow personally is to throw yourself into as many unconventional situations with as little context as possible, and to constantly force your mind to be adapting to new situations, adapting to new projects where you essentially have to learn everything from scratch, right? That's the way you grow. You don't grow by reading a ton of self-help books. You don't grow by doing a bunch of cold plunges at 4 a.m. in the morning. You grow by doing. You grow by learning and throwing yourself and forcing yourself to constantly be adapting and constantly be shifting contexts, shifting environments, and stuff like that. And people might disagree with me. They will disagree with me for good reason, right? I understand it. But I do think that a lot of people are over-indexing on the meta of self-help, on the meta of productivity, on the meta of self-growth, and not really doing anything with their hands or doing anything tangible to really make that happen, so to speak.
Interesting. One of my favorite things talking to you, Ed, is how willing you are to be a contrarian, how divergent you are from like common lines of thought, like within like both society as a whole as well as like the founder community. Like you have no shame. You'll say just how it is and just how you think it to be, and that's wonderful. And I think that's definitely like been instrumental for your success. When you say being able to think outside the box and be willing to be a contrarian.
Well, if you want a contrarian, you won't get this different outcomes. And if you aren't a contrarian, you won't get different outcomes. And the typical outcome as a founder is you fail. So that's all I can really say about it.
The typical outcome for founder is what?
Failure. The typical outcome for a founder is failure. If you start a business, expect it to fail. You can plan for it to succeed, but expect it to fail, right? And if you aren't doing anything different from anyone else, why would you expect a different outcome?
Saying that, with that in mind, do you believe in manifestation?
I believe that manifestation, you manifest things by taking actions to make it happen. You don't manifest things by writing stuff down in a notebook and then doing nothing. That's all I can really say about it, right? Like I know some people say, "Yeah, I'm manifesting $1 million," and I'm like, "What the fuck are you doing to get $1 million?" And they're like, "Well, I'm just manifesting." I'm like, "Well, good luck with that."
Yeah, absolutely. Like it's manifestation has to mean execution.
Manifestation is execute. Manifestation is just execution with extra mindfulness. And that's all I can really say. Like execution with intent. Manifestation is execution with intent. And to call it anything else is no. It's manifestation. It's not writing stuff down in the book and praying that it happens. It's doing the actions to get to that spot constantly, day in, day out, with discipline. And even if you get punched in the face, you still keep going.
I'd also add that it's like certainty in like your destiny, you know, like that I am going to do this thing, like visualizing all the steps and then taking the steps, but like that certainty that this really can happen to you. Like you really can, like you as that 20-year-old can really like imagine you one day sending satellites to space. Like you have to know that is your future. That is your destiny. I think that's one of the most powerful parts of manifestation. But if you don't visualize the steps and take the steps, then like it's just a dream that you once had that you never realized, right?
The way I see destiny is this, right? You imagine being at a mountain valley, and destiny is the other side of that valley, the mountains in the distance. But between the two mountains is a massive dense forest. It is your job to go through that forest onto that other mountain and climb up it. However, if you never climb in and go into that forest, you're never going to meet your destiny, and that's just a waste of time.
Yeah. That one of the things that like upsets me the most is sometimes meeting individuals who know what their calling is, who aren't exerting agency on their lives. Like it makes me very emotional, like seeing that, and it frustrates me tremendously, especially if it's somebody that I care about. Do you feel the same?
Well, it's I can say that having high agency is pursuing an ambitious project or ambitious goal isn't for everyone, and I understand people who want to take a safe path in life, right? Being a founder means you're an anomaly. Being a founder should not be. If everyone was a founder, society wouldn't run, right? We need people to go the safe path, because it's people that go the safe path that really make sure society runs. Yeah, founders change the outcome and the dynamics of society, but ultimately the backbone of society is not us. The backbone of society is the people who play the safe path.
Of course.
Yeah, like
I was just gonna say, I don't mean like just like specifically to the founder journey, like somebody that like they know they want to be a musician, but like they're just too afraid to start, or somebody that knows they want to be an engineer, but
Mhm.
like they're they don't think they're smart enough or something like that.
Mhm.
Somebody like I mean that not just like specific to the
Mhm.
founder journey in general, like that's something that I see all the time. And it's a problem I don't know how to solve. Like if I could solve that
Mhm.
problem, I would feel like tremendously fulfilled. Do you,
Mhm.
I mean, do you have any thoughts on like how, on that specifically?
I see it, but ultimately, it's you either do it or you don't. I mean, to be honest, if sometimes I get people asking me, "Hey, should I be a founder? Should I take a job or something like that?" And I'm like, "Well, let's. Here are the pros. Here are the cons. But
Mm,
I making decisions in life is one of the few luxuries that we have,
sure. For you.
and one of the few freedoms that we have.
Yeah.
It's not up to me to take. It's not my job to take that away from you. It's up to you to execute it and to do it. I can give you information, but I can't make you do it.
Of course. Of course. Yeah. Understandably so. Is there anything that you use to make yourself like better at doing these ambitious things? From a lot of founders, I hear manifestation. Is there any other key tools or principles or values that you hold dear that has enabled you to get as far as you have so far?
Well, one always has a set of core values that they remain deeply integral to, right? Like I said, never change your core self, never change your core values. But beyond that, I think you're just really overthinking it. You just there really isn't a point of like getting the newest note taking app, or I'm not getting like getting the newest note taking app, or like setting a new schedule for yourself, or doing all these productivity hacks. You either do it or you don't. And at the end of the day, you just do it. There's not really there's not really like a secret hack that makes things easier, right? You can have all the tools you need. You can have all of the mindful practices or thought processes that you need, but if you don't do it, the outcome is still the same.
I think that is a good takeaway from like your to understand Ed and understand Ed's success. Ed just does the thing. That's the TLDR, right? Just go do the thing and stop talking about it, stop thinking about it. Just go execute.
Yeah, I mean, some people say like I don't want to talk about it. But if I talk about it, then it makes me less motivated to do it. And I'm like, well, that's your bloody problem. You just do the thing. Just do the thing that you said you do,
Yeah,
right? And that solves your problem. And if you don't do the thing that you said you do, well, that's not anyone's fault that didn't happen. You just didn't do the thing.
just didn't do the thing. Ed, before we wrap up, anything
Mhm.
else you'd like to share with aspiring young founders or folks looking to work in space or anybody just at home, a layman, just enjoying watching? Any parting message you'd like to share?
Dude, just do the thing, man. Like if you want to do something, just do it right now. There are no prerequisites in life to doing anything. Almost no prerequisites in life to doing anything. Uh, the prereqs are there to make it less painful to do something. But if you can tolerate any amount of pain, then anything is within reach, really. And if you just jump out and start doing the thing, there's not really anything that can stop you.
All right, Ed, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. Thank you.